Hey, welcome to Dial Stock Talk, where I talk about topics relating to investing and finance, but more specifically the stock market. Now in this video I'll be going over what to look for in dividend stocks. But before we get started, make sure you smash the like button because it helps the YouTube algorithm. It helps YouTube know that this is quality content and help my videos reach a broader audience. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button and you also hit the notification bell so you know when I make new videos. Now, normally on Wednesdays or Thursdays, I normally release the video between 12 or 1. And I just wanted to mention, if you are a big fan of investing and finance, make sure you check out my store, Wall Street Stock Apparel, where I make custom investment and finance t-shirts. Now let's get into what to look for in dividend stocks. Well, let's first go over what is dividend stocks. So dividend stocks are companies that pay a percentage of their earnings to shareholders just for holding the stock. And that payment is called dividends. So a lot of times companies either pay dividends quarterly or annually. So now you know what dividend stocks are. So one of the things that people pay attention to is the dividend yield. So the dividend yield is the percentage of dividend that a company pays. So a lot of times, a lot of people, when they first get into dividend stocks, that's immediately what they pay attention to. I'm gonna give you some rough ranges, but by the way, if you would like a step-by-step of every single step, including the screenings and exact criteria, make sure you let me know in the comments below, because I can definitely do a more in-depth video where I go step-by-step, the sites that I use, the small details that I look for, everything. When I'll be going over, I'll actually go over numerous dividend stocks. I just wanted to make sure you guys were interested, and I'll make a very comprehensive video where I go step by step of my personal process of what I look for in dividend stocks. A lot of times what I consider, like for dividend yield, the percentage that I like is probably roughly between 3 or 7%. They do have dividends that pay much higher, but for me personally, I like to see that particular range. A lot of times, people who first see dividend stocks, they just pay attention to the dividend yield. I definitely wouldn't recommend that, because a lot of times with the dividend yield, you want to make sure that the company can pay that dividend yield without their share price or stock price end up fluctuating. Because you also got to remember, and this is for beginners or any type of investors, when your dividend yield end up increasing once the stock price goes down. So even though the dividend yield may be getting higher, the stock price is getting lower, so it'll end up offsetting. You want to make sure you can get a dividend yield that the company can consistently pay, as well as maintain their share price. Because if they're losing their share price, you're kind of defeating the purpose. But once again, I generally like to see a dividend range between 3 and 7%. Some people have their own particular interests, but like I said, I particularly like to see 3 or 7%. Anything above that, not unless you're like a REIT, I'm kind of concerned of, can the company sustain that much, and are they just paying that high dividend because their business is in jeopardy of declining over the years and they're just trying to attract investors. So those are some things that, as far as the dividend yield, that I end up looking at. And by the way, a lot of people who build up a dividend portfolio, a lot of times the whole purpose is to eventually build your dividend portfolio big enough where you can end up living off of the dividends that they end up paying. So that's why you need to know that the dividends are reliable. And the next thing you want to look at is the dividend track record. You want to look at how consistent that the company end up paying their dividend. You also want to look at, me personally, I would like to see a company at least paying dividend for 5 years, so they have a track record. Also, another good thing is companies that's increasing their dividend rate over time. That's always a good sign to see. And by the way, if you're new, they also have something called Dividend Aristocrats, that are companies that has been raising their dividend and paying it consistently for over 25 years. So if you want to, you can end up starting with that particular list. All of those companies has been raising their dividends for the past 25 years. So that is definitely a good list you want to check out. And the next thing you want to pay attention to is balance sheet. You definitely want to, if you're investing in dividend stock, you definitely want to see a company that has a strong balance sheet, good fundamentals. If a company has a lot of debt, I would probably stay away from that, not unless that particular sector is used to acquiring a lot of debt. And if they have a lot of debt, I would also like to see a lot of cash. So that way, because you want to make sure that the company is able to pay the dividend without lowering the dividend, so you know that they have the ability to end up paying their dividend. Because you don't want them to skip dividends, because a lot of times if the company end up skipping dividend, a lot of people end up investing in the company for the dividend, so it can end up hurting the share price. So these are things you want to definitely pay attention to. Also, you would like to pick a dividend stock that has a return on their equity or the return on their assets. They're a good thing because you definitely want to see the company value growing over time. So anytime they can get returns off of the equity or the assets they have, that normally gives a good indication that the company are in good financial standing. Also, you would like to see companies' earnings growing, the earnings growing over time. If you want some kind of ranges, I particularly like the ranges of at least 5% to 15%. You don't want it to be too high because it won't be sustainable. And just remember, dividend stocks are more established companies, so you gotta make sure they can maintain it. By the way, I would like to see the 5-year dividend growth at least above 4%, preferably 5% or more. I think that is a good one. The reason why I said that, because the S&P 5-year growth is about 4%, so you want to at least make sure that the company is keeping up with that. Preferably, if you invest in dividend stocks, you would like to see it higher. So some of the things you may want to keep an eye on when dividends, you want probably a lower P/E ratio, because that can indicate that relative to their earnings that it's a good share price. Now, a lot of times, don't be strict on those things, but you just want to keep in mind. Some of the other things you may want to look at is the amount of debt the company has reference to their equity. So if they have a debt to equity over 2, to me that's not personally a good sign, because that means they have twice as much debt compared to the amount of equity that there is in the company. So the next thing you definitely want to pay attention to is the payout ratio. The payout ratio is how much dividends that they're actually paying out relative to their earnings. The dividend payout ratio is 50%. That means they're paying out 50% of their earnings in the form of a dividend. So I personally would like to see the payout ratio lower than 60%, because you don't want it to be too high. Because if it's too high, that pretty much means that the company are paying out most of their earnings to the dividend shareholders. So then that could potentially be a problem, because you also want the company to actually still maintain somewhat of a growth over time. So you definitely want some of that money to be reinvested. You also want to make sure, just in case in future years the companies may be having a hard time, that they can end up have a healthy payout ratio. Next thing you also want to pay attention to is the total returns. You not only want to just pay attention to the dividend, but you also would like to see the stock price increasing over time. If you can get a company that pays good dividend and the stock price is increasing over time, you're getting money from the dividend and also from the stock appreciation over the years. So that's definitely a good thing. The next thing you want to pay attention to, and in my opinion, this is very important, I mentioned that in some of my other videos, is you want to make sure you have a steady cash flow. Cash flow meaning the amount of money coming in and the amount of money going out. So you definitely want to make sure, especially with dividend stock, that there is a good, consistent, steady cash flow. Because whenever the cash flow gets messed up, then there's always a concern about the company being able to maintain their dividends. So you definitely want to see a steady cash flow, something that you can probably predict the next 5 or 10 years. So therefore, it can be a good investment. So the next thing you want to look at is the overall trend of the sector, meaning, is this an industry that is dying? Is this an industry that you can see 4 or 5 years from now? What could particularly go wrong with this company? Do this company, compared to the other competitors, is this company competing? Do you think that the company competitors are growing in that particular sector? Also, do you think at the overall market, because some situations, there are certain industries that will struggle over the years. So those are the things you want to keep in mind, because think about it, when you're paying attention to dividend stocks, you want companies who can consistently pay the dividend and also at least maintain their share price. So if the share price is decreasing, you end up losing money. And as far as the share price, so with dividend stocks, you want to at least make sure that the stock price is at least holding steady. Me personally, I like to see stocks increasing over time. And by the way, that's pretty much it in this particular video. But like I said, let me know in the comments below if you want a more in-depth where I go step by step. I'm actually using the actual website and different types of screenings. Let me know if you would like that in the comment below. But that concludes this video. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the like button, and if you're new, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And also let me know in the comments below, what are your favorite dividend stocks?